Mary, thank you so much. As you were speaking, the picture of the baby that was born in January, is that what you said? Was up on the screen. And I just want us all to realize that that baby was born because of our partnership with Wellspring. And so you had a hand in that, as well as all the other stories that Mary could share. And so thank you just for your continual support of that. As we jump into our time in the Word, we'll be in Genesis chapter 21. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Genesis chapter 21. While you turn there, we'll march through verses 22 through 34. As you turn there, I just want to give you kind of the direction that we're heading. So we'll go to Genesis chapter 25, and then we'll take a pause in the book of Genesis. And so we'll have Easter, we'll take a break from that, and then that next Sunday, April 12, I believe, Zach will be preaching. And so be in prayer for him as well. And then after we finish Genesis, a few weeks after that, we'll be in the letter to the Philippians. So you can start reading through that. But Genesis chapter 21 today. Okay. As the story is often told, two young students at Stanford University were struggling financially. They were on the verge of having to leave school because they couldn't pay their bills. But these two students, they had a plan. What they planned was to organize and promote a concert. And they would use the proceeds and the profits from the concert to pay their bills. And so the artist that they chose to get was a famous Polish pianist who had the last name Paderewski. Okay, Paderewski. He agreed to do the concert for $2,000, which was quite a bit of money when this was taking place. But when the night ended, they had only raised $1,600. They had an issue on their hand. And so they gave Paderewski everything that they had and then promised to pay the rest later. Paderewski tore up the IOU note that they had given him and gave the money back to them. He told them to take what they needed and pay their bills. It was an act of costly grace. Years later, this pianist became the president of Poland. And during his presidency, many of the Polish people were starving because a famine was on that land. And after World War I, it had limited resources. And so he reached out to the American government, and Herbert Hoover, who at the time was not the president, he was actually over the Bureau of Food and Exports. And Hoover sent thousands of tons of food to Poland to save the starving people. Paderewski traveled then to Paris to thank Hoover personally, but when he thanked him, Hoover said, "That's no problem, Mr. Paderewski. Though you may not remember, it was when I was a young college student, you helped me when I was in great trouble." Church, the point here is a blessing received becomes a blessing given. A blessing received becomes a blessing given. And in Genesis chapter 21, we're going to see that God's people were never meant to simply receive his blessing. They were to become a conduit of it. Okay? God's people were never meant to only receive God's blessing. They were to be a conduit of it. And so here's our outline: the recognition of God's blessing, the resolution through God's blessing, and the remembrance to God's blessing. All right, the recognition, the resolution, and the remembrance. So for our first point here, let's look at verse 22 from Genesis chapter 21. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham. All right, so before we get to what is exactly said to Abraham, let me ask this question. The author Moses wrote at that time. And so my question is, well, what time? Okay, well, the same time that God was providing water and life in the desert for Ishmael that we looked at last week, right? At that time, these two men approach Abraham. And I point this out to say that these two stories where God supplies life and provision, a blessing of provision from a well to Ishmael, is connected to this story that we have at the end of Genesis chapter 21. Okay, why? Because God keeps his promises. And he said that he would bless God's offspring, or Abraham's offspring. And in our text, God is going to provide a blessing through another well, ultimately that is going to flow to the promised son, the heir of the promise, Isaac. And so both Ishmael and Isaac are going to receive a well. They will inherit it. Okay, and so I take the time to point this out because God is at work to keep his promises in a million ways that we often do not see. Okay, at that time, when God was caring for Ishmael, God is also going to keep his promise to Abraham. And the same is true for us today, that God keeps his word in a million ways that you and I may not recognize. We may not see it at the time. And so at that time that God was keeping his word, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, look at what they say, God is with you in all that you do. And so these two men approach Abraham, and they give a statement, and then we'll look at the request that they're going to make. But the statement that they give is interesting. Okay, God is with you in all you do. Now, this is not the first time that Abimelech and Abraham have interacted, is it? It's not. We were introduced to Abimelech in chapter 20, where we found out that Abimelech was the king of Gerar. And in their first interaction, Abimelech, the king, took Abraham's wife, Sarah, remember, and he took her into his harem, in essence. Okay, but the kicker is that Abraham and Sarah had deceived Abimelech. Right? They had told Abimelech, Sarah is Abraham's sister, and so unknowingly, Abimelech takes Sarah. Now, this was an issue because Sarah, once again, sits in Abimelech's harem in danger, but also the promise of God is now sitting in danger. And so what does God do? Do you remember? He intervenes in a dream to Abimelech. He warns him, hey, you are a dead man. Okay? And so Abimelech, fearing God, gives Sarah back to Abraham. And so with that backstory of this interaction, Abimelech once again approaches Abraham, but he's not alone. Who's with him? Phicol. Who is Phicol? The commander of his army. And so the first thing that they acknowledge to Abraham is a key acknowledgement. Once again, what is it? God is with you in all that you do. Church, this is a powerful, powerful statement because we have this pagan king, an outsider, who has recognized the truth that Abraham still has to learn. And what is that truth? That God is with him. He has been with Abraham in the highs, and he has been with Abraham in the lows. He has been with Abraham in his faithful success, and he has been with him in his faltering sins. Church, this is what God does in his grace. He, in grace, moves towards his people. In grace, he walks with his people. In grace, he promises to never leave his people. God, in his grace, moves towards us, walks with us, and stays with us. And Christian, I wonder, if you came in here today recognizing that the same God who is with Abraham in his highs and in his lows is the same God that is with you in your highs and in your lows. And he's the same God who is with you when you feel like you have it all together, and he is the same God who is with you when you do not have it all together. And Abimelech has recognized this truth that God is with you, Abraham, in all that you do. And so this king of Gerar recognizes something that Abraham still has to learn. He has recognized the blessing of God upon Abraham's life. And it is Abimelech's recognition of the blessing of God that brings him to make a request of Abraham. Look at verse 23. Abimelech says, "Now therefore swear to me, make an oath here by God, that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity, but as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me, and with the land where you have sojourned." All right, so do not deal falsely with me, Abraham. And why would Abimelech request that? Right? Well, Abraham has already dealt falsely with him. As I mentioned, he's already deceived him. And in so doing, he's put Abimelech's life and his legacy of his household in danger. But Abimelech requests, hey, swear an oath to me. By who? By God, that you will deal kindly with me as I have dealt with you. Swear by God that you will deal kindly with me as I have dealt with you. And what Abimelech is seeking in this moment is a formal treaty, this formal agreement to be made between them. And this is why Phicol, the commander of his army, is there. So that in hearing the agreement, he might instruct the army to keep the agreement. And so just so we're clear, what's the agreement? Bless me, Abraham, as I have blessed you. Bless me as I have blessed you. Honor me because I have honored you. And that should ring some bells in our mind, shouldn't it? Right? When God promised to Abraham in Genesis 12:3, "I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And so from the very beginning of Abraham's call, this included an understanding that the nations would be blessed through Abraham. And so God's people, the trajectory of them is never inward, but always outward. Hey, look at me, because this is really important. The blessing upon God's people is never meant to be inward, but always to be outward. That's the trajectory. The role of God's people is never to contain the blessing. It was to be a conduit of the blessing. And what that means for us as a church, the people of God, is that we do not exist for us. We exist for those in our neighborhoods. We exist for those in the nations. We gather to scatter to send. That is our role as God's people. Right? The blessing of God upon us may never terminate with us, but flow through us. And so just to make this point further, I know I'm laboring this point, but Abimelech is not just seeking his own favor, his own blessing. He's actually seeking the favor upon who? His children and his children's children. Right? "Do not deal falsely with me," he said, "or with my who? Descendants, or my posterity." Now here's the question. Why does Abimelech have descendants in the first place? You remember, right? Last week, God had closed the wombs of the household of Abimelech. And how did he open them? Through the very intercessory prayer of Abraham. And so now he's seeking, coming to Abraham, who prayed for these children, to then bless these children. He's seeking a generational blessing. And so we're meant to wonder at this point in the story, what is Abraham going to do? How is he going to respond? And in verse 24, Abraham said, "I will swear. I will make an oath." Which means in this moment, Abraham is not just acting in a decision for himself, but he's making a decision for how it's going to shape his son and his son's sons and how they will live in the land. He is modeling for the people of God how they are to act. Both those in the Old Testament as well as the church in the New Testament. Because we, church, once again, are to be a conduit of God's blessing. And with this in mind, I want us to think, with this blessing to go to the children, I want to fast forward here. Just stay with me to Genesis chapter 26, okay? This is what takes place in Genesis chapter 26. After Abraham says, "I swear," to Abimelech, he dies and then the promised son, Isaac, stands in the same region that the oath is taking place, in Gerar. And you know who Isaac encounters? A man named Abimelech. And Isaac actually deceives this man named Abimelech by giving his wife, Rebekah, to Abimelech, saying that it's his sister. Does that sound familiar? Right? Apple does not fall far from the tree, does it? Right? And when Abimelech finds out about it, he deals kindly with Isaac, gives her back. And then Abimelech later on shows up to Isaac because there's this dispute over a well. That's going to come in handy. And he comes with Phicol, the commander of his army, seeking peace. And so whether Genesis chapter 26 is the same Abimelech from our text, or it's more likely from Abimelech's household, and I say that because Abimelech is a dynastic name. Okay? And so they come and they say this, listen, we see plainly that the Lord has blessed you. In other words, we've recognized God's blessing upon your life. Make a covenant with us, swear an oath. And just as we have not touched you, and have done nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace, now you bless us. And so we come to these two passages, these two parallel passages, and what they're doing is building a motif. The conduit of God's blessing that Abraham was to be, Abraham's heirs are also to be. And so don't miss this. The recognition of God's people to be a conduit of blessing flows forward from one generation to the next, all the way down to you and me. And so do you see this as the purpose of your life? Right? To be a blessing because you have been blessed by God. Right? The purpose in your home, the purpose in your neighborhood, the purpose in your workplace or in your school. Do you ultimately see your life as a conduit of the blessing that you have received? Because God in the gospel has shown us grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. In that grace, that blessing is never meant to terminate with us, but to flow as a conduit of grace through us. And so the question is not whether we have received something, church. We have. The question is, what will we do with what we have received? That this recognition of blessing then works outwardly to the resolution through God's blessing, which is our second point. Look at verse 25. Take a drink here. When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, all right, so pause here. Abraham swears to Abimelech by God that he will bless him and deal kindly with him. And then Abraham raises an issue that needs to be resolved. Okay, a well, we're told in verse 30, Abraham dug it. All right, and so here's the contention. Abimelech, you've said that you've dealt kindly with me. Now follow me here because this is important. Abimelech, you said that you've dealt kindly with me, but your servants have stolen the well. Abraham is sojourning in the desert of Negev, and a well is not a small thing. It is a matter of life and death. And what is Abimelech's response to this? In verse 26, I didn't know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I've not heard of it until this day. In other words, I've been deceived, right? Pleads ignorance. That even though Abimelech is ignorant in this matter of that the well is stolen, he's still responsible, though. And I say that because God held him responsible even though he was ignorant of Sarah being Abraham's sister. Right? And God, holding him in responsibility, had to stop him from sinning. He's unknowingly taken the woman, and now in our text, he has unknowingly taken the well. And yet, church, Abraham swears peace when? Before he ever brings up the well. Not the other way around. In other words, he promised to deal kindly with Abimelech before any issue has been solved. Even though he addresses the wrong, he doesn't merely demand what is his. He bears the cost to secure peace. This is what the blessing of God produces, a people who move towards peace. Not after everything is fixed, but while it's still broken. Oh, church, see this. Grace is not the result of resolution. It is the means to it. And grace is not the result of resolution. It is the means to it. And Abraham in this moment is this conduit of God's blessing. That the grace that's been shown to him is now being shown to others. In verse 27, look at it. So hearing this complaint and the ignorance of Abimelech, Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech. And the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart. And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart?" He said, "These 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well." Abraham offers to Abimelech 7 ewe lambs. And he does it as somewhat of a formal agreement to the covenant as an evidence that the well is his. Right? It's kind of like they're signing a dotted line here. And we have to see this. This is not just that Abraham blesses Abimelech by showing him grace, but it's actually an act of costly grace by giving him the lambs. Abraham has dug the well. Right? Abimelech's servants took the well, but Abraham takes the cost upon himself to achieve peace. Why? Because the recognition of God's blessing works outward to the resolution through God's blessing, so that those who have received peace make peace. And ultimately, church, this points us to a greater resolution, doesn't it? Because the greatest conflict is not between people. It's between us and God. And we could not resolve that conflict. We could not fix that broken relationship. But God's grace through Jesus Christ resolves it. In Jesus, he did not avoid the conflict. No, he absorbs it. He did not ignore the sin. He pays for it. And because of that, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. And so, church, the resolution that we see in Genesis chapter 21 is a shadow of a greater resolution that we have received through Jesus Christ, peace with God. Grace is not the result of resolution. It is the means to it. Verse 31, as we close down here. Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. Church, in these final verses, we see our final and concluding point, the remembrance of God's blessing. I want us to notice 2 things. The place where Abraham is and the tree that Abraham planted. Therefore, this place was called Beersheba. And Beersheba is interesting. It has this simultaneous meaning. It can mean either the swearing of the oath at the well or the well of 7. Okay, in Hebrew, both swearing and 7 sound and look very familiar. And so Beersheba represents this treaty, this oath, this covenant that had been made in this place, so that the well becomes a memorial that was to remind God's people of how God had kept his promises and provided life. See, Abimelech and Phicol, they leave this well, going back to their own land, as this marker that now this well is truly Abraham's and it will go to his heir, Isaac. They have legal claim. And Abraham's response is what? To plant a tree and call upon the name of the Lord. Why a tree? Why a tree? Well, something visible, something tangible. A tamarisk tree that survives in the famine, in the desert, in the drought. Right? This tamarisk tree serves as this lasting landmark of God's faithfulness to provide and bless Abraham, and to provide and bless Abraham's offspring and heirs. And so at the close of this chapter, Abraham has a promised son. He has the provision of a well in a land. And in this, Abraham has learned to recognize what Abimelech has recognized, that God is with him, that God has always been with him, and God will continue to be with him. He is the everlasting God. He's not temporary. He is not changing. He is not failing. Church, this is our God, the God who has been with us, the God who is with us, and the God who will be with us. And so Abraham plants a tree as a subjective evidence to the blessing of God. In church, we look also to a tree as the objective evidence of God's blessing. Right? A tree of remembrance, a wooden cross, which proclaims to us that God is with us. Peace has been made in this covenant. This new covenant will never be forgotten. May God be praised. We're going to continue with our worship, close our worship with hymn 53, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. Would you please stand as John comes and we sing this congregational hymn? Father, thank you so much for your blessing upon us, for your love and your grace towards us. I pray that you might empower us by your Spirit to be a blessing, a conduit of your grace into our neighborhoods and to the nations. And so as we leave this place, would you keep before us your love and your kindness, and may we deal with others as you have dealt with us. And it's in your name, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. Church, make sure you grab a cookie. Connect with Mary from Wellspring as well. You are dismissed. Love you guys more than you know.